At the start of this week, the Premier League dropped an unbelievable allegation bombshell that Man City have breached almost 100 Premier League rules in relation to financial fair play. Like, this is unprecedented. This could have serious consequences for both City and the rest of football, no matter the outcome. And there's been plenty of knee-jerk reactions to the news and loads of conflicting information and reports. So what I've tried to do is pull together all the relevant and accurate information from the most reliable sources I could find. I've carried out a deep dive into every allegation in order to present to you guys what's actually happening and what this all means. This all stems from the Der Spiegel leaks from a few years ago and is basically a continuation of the UEFA investigation into Manchester City. This video is going to tell you exactly what the allegations are, what they mean, whether City are likely to get away with it, and what punishment City could realistically receive if the case is proven against them. I'll also explain some external factors which could influence the case in City's favour and what I think the outcome will be. Let's begin with some background context. The reason these investigations have been carried out is due to a series of leaks published in a German magazine called Der Spiegel. Courtesy of a hacker, Der Spiegel acquired private emails between high-ranking City officials and a number of other financial documents which painted the picture of City being in severe breach of a number of FFP rules. This led to UEFA's investigation and ruling the City would be banned from European competition for 2 seasons for breaching FFP, before this was overruled on appeal by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS for short. This most recent accusation blindsided everyone in the world of football, and high-ranking City officials only learnt of the news moments before the information was made public. But City have always maintained this information was obtained illegally, is out of context, they're not guilty of any wrongdoing, and that this was evidenced by the CAS ruling in their favour. And the official line from the club, both publicly and privately, is that they're confident of defeating these latest allegations and of clearing their name. And now let's take a look at the Premier League statement itself. The Premier League confirms that it has today referred a number of alleged breaches of the Premier League rules by City to a commission. This independent commission will comprise a panel of 3 experts, one of which will be a legal expert. Now, this is an investigation 4 years in the making, so naturally the statement is extensive and covers 98 breaches total. It's worth noting that the statement covers 11 rulebooks, all with differing articles, and that led to me being particularly confused at the alleged breach of Article K20, which is all about grass length, but it turns out this was actually referencing an older version of the rulebook. Something to bear in mind if you want to deep dive into the articles yourself. Now, there are 5 key points the Premier League is alleging, but essentially, the entire case is going to focus on whether point number 1 is proven. Such is the severity of the accusation. So most of this explanation is going to focus on point number 1. It consists of no less than 50 breaches and states that from 2009 to 2018, City breached the Premier League rules that required City to provide, in good faith, accurate financial information that gives a true and fair view of the club's financial position, in particular with respect to its revenue, including sponsorship revenue, its related parties, and its operating costs. Now, this is genuinely a staggering allegation. The Premier League is alleging that not 1, not 2, not 3, but 9 years of City accounts aren't accurate, haven't been produced in good faith, are wrong, are not true, and are therefore false. This is an accusation of civil fraud. The allegation is that for 9 seasons, City knowingly and purposefully failed to give a true review of the club's financial position. In terms of these specific details, we all know about the allegations of City's inflated sponsorship deals and related party transactions that dominated the CAS case. See City's Etihad deal and other commercial deals related to the UAE. But the magnitude of this accusation is unprecedented. In case you're not aware about the context, the allegation goes that City received sponsorship money from a company, let's use Etihad as the example, that didn't represent fair value. The sponsor knowingly overpaid so that City could note that down on their company accounts as a big revenue booster, meaning they had more wiggle room in terms of spending money on players as they're hiding their genuine operating costs. Under the Companies Act 06, a company's annual accounts must be approved by the board of directors and signed on behalf of the board by a director of the company. To accuse City of submitting false accounts for 9 years is to accuse City's board of directors of dishonesty. It's an allegation of bad faith, misleading information, and of concealment. I cannot stress enough how huge that is. In English law, claims containing such serious allegations as dishonesty require incredibly convincing evidence to succeed. And I think it's important to note the context from the CAS case at this point, because this is what UEFA also alleged to a much less severe degree. And this is where I struggle to see how the Premier League will prove their case. What they're alleging is far more serious than what UEFA alleged. And because of that, naturally, the Premier League will be held to a much higher standard in respect of the evidence they present. The greater the severity of an allegation, the greater the degree of scrutiny that will be placed upon the evidence and the case presented. With a lower level of allegation, UEFA couldn't prove its case before CAS. There is overlap with the CAS case, but the Prem allegations are more extensive and serious. Let's take a look at this extract from the CAS judgment, which I think is really telling. The panel agrees with City that a finding that Etihad's sponsorship contributions were improperly funded would require a conclusion the evidence of several high-ranking officials of large commercial enterprises were false, these witnesses would be subject to criminal investigation, and that UEFA's theory could only be correct if City also lied to the FA, UEFA, and most importantly of all, misled its own auditors, financial experts, accountancy firms like Deloitte, and the professional assessors of fair value at UEFA. CAS concluded this scenario just wasn't realistic, or if it was, a much higher standard of proof was required. City produced a number of their own witnesses and provided evidence to support their side of the story, something never challenged by UEFA. UEFA failed to provide anyone to challenge the evidence, and subsequently the CAS panel had no option but to accept City's evidence. As there was no challenge, the panel had to conclude the witnesses were credible. So this is why I'm struggling to see a reality in which the Premier League can prove point one. The level of deception and conspiracy. When you think of how many people and organisations were involved, it only works if you accept that City were able to mislead these financial experts, including the likes of Deloitte. It makes it an unbelievable allegation by the Premier League. And if UEFA failed to provide any witnesses or significant evidence, who are the Premier League supposed to call upon? Unless some key witness comes out of the woodwork, I don't see how the Premier League gets over that huge hurdle. From what we know, all the Premier League has to go off is the leaked Der Spiegel information, which we've already seen in the CAS case, as well as the documentation City has provided to the Premier League. Sticking with CAS, City won that case due to two main factors. UEFA failed to prove its case sufficiently on some points, and for the remaining points, they were time-barred, so City didn't have to challenge them. A lot's been made of the idea that the Premier League has no time bar in relation to its rules, but it's safe to say that there must be a limitation period of sorts, and if that's the case, the Limitation Act 1980, a standard principle under English law, is that offences committed more than 6 years ago can't comprise civil litigation. What the Premier League must be relying on then is one of the exceptions to the Limitation Act, which is that this 6-year period isn't relevant when a party has deliberately deceived another party and has attempted to conceal information. As we know, the Premier League is alleging City has concealed this information by deliberately manipulating its filings. So time barring is another obstacle the Premier League will need to overcome. But based on the severity of even 1 year of accounts being false, I don't really see that being too relevant in this case. It's really important to note that this case is going to drag on and on and on for months, probably years. It's going to be incredibly hard and complicated to prove that 9 years worth of accounts are false. It's an enormous undertaking, and it's why so many legal experts are shocked that the Premier League has made these claims. And this is where I think it's important to address the political elephant in the room. The UAE is one of the UK's biggest trading partners. Just a few weeks ago, an agreement was reached between the UAE and UK government whereby the UAE would invest £10 billion into the UK's economy. So obviously, from a UK government perspective, there's a desire to keep relations with the UAE very friendly and cordial, to attract even more investment in the future, and to further that alliance. This case is a serious threat to those relations. While City isn't outright owned by the UAE, its board of directors consists of very high-ranking members of its political establishment. And what the English Premier League is doing is literally accusing high-ranking UAE officials of dishonesty and lying for a period of 9 years. And there's no way that officials from both countries won't lobby behind the scenes. That's the most severe point of the 5 covered, but there are 4 more to come. The second point, which consists of 12 breaches, is basically an accusation of concealed manager and player remuneration. 2A concerns Roberto Mancini's salary. It's alleged that this was partially paid externally so as to not appear on City's accounts, and 2b concerns Yaya Touré's agent fee, where, likewise, this was paid for off the books and not properly disclosed to the Premier League. Now, whilst no specific figures have been provided, it's very unlikely we're dealing with vast sums of money. And I don't see this offence having legs since, from a commercial perspective, it wouldn't really make sense for City to hide these operating costs. In the grand scheme of things, it would be an irrelevant amount of money, and I'd be surprised if it transpired City went through all that trouble just to get an amount of Mancini and Touré's remuneration off the company accounts. What's probably most important about this point is that if the Premier League fails to prove their case RE point 1, then by definition their point 2 fails, because it's an issue of misrepresenting company accounts for both points. Point 3 is only 2 breaches, and it's simply stating that even if City got away with the alleged breaches of UEFA's rules, the Premier League can still investigate those matters, and believe City did commit breaches in that respect. Again, I'm not sure how this is going to be proven, given UEFA themselves couldn't prove their own rules. Point 4 consists of 4 breaches, and this section covers the Premier League sustainability rules and filing of accounts. It's essentially a repeat of point 1, and again, if the Premier League fails on point 1 or succeeds on point 1, they'll fail or succeed on point 4 by definition. And the final point, 5, comprises 30 breaches. This is a catch-all provision which covers the 18-19 season to date and alleges the City haven't delivered, in good faith, requested information and documents relating to its investigations into City. Whilst points 2 to 5 are still very serious, basically the entire case is going to rest on the first point, where the Premier League is asserting that for 9 years, City has submitted false accounts, has misled auditors, and its directors have been actively dishonest in that respect. So it's therefore going to be up to the independent panel to agree whether or not City's accounts are fraudulent or not. I'll repeat, this is a huge allegation, and there's no way the Premier League has taken this decision lightly. If proven guilty, the consequences have to be serious. Based on the severity of it all, you'd have to conclude the Premier League has a cast iron argument and is totally confident of success. I just don't understand how the independent panel will be expected to arrive at the conclusion that there's sufficient evidence of dishonesty and false accounts, given what happened in the UEFA case at CAS. It's a much higher standard of proof that needs to be reached here. One of 2 things is going to happen here. City are going to be hit with extremely severe punishments given the level of alleged dishonesty, or the Premier League will look like a genuine laughingstock. In terms of the repercussions, if City's found guilty, technically under their rules, the Premier League can do basically whatever they want. They can expel City from the Premier League, they can strip them of past titles, they can give points deductions, literally anything they want. All I would say on that point is it's very unlikely that titles will be stripped and City relegated, unless every single breach is proven. I've touched on how I feel that's a very unlikely scenario in respect to the most serious allegations. From a precedent perspective, we can take a look at similar situations across Europe. The most applicable scenarios would be the Calciopoli scandal from the mid-noughties in Italy and the French bribery scandal of the early 90s. The clubs involved in these scandals were found guilty of bribery and match fixing. Titles were stripped, and in the case of the second Serie A season, following the scandal, the title was awarded to second place. But the reason I don't see a similar outcome here is that these were criminal matters and not civil, so I wouldn't expect the punishment to be as harsh, and the scandals were revealed shortly or immediately after the conclusion of the relevant season. This case differs in that what we're talking about is title wins from over a decade ago, so I'm not sure it's a comparable situation. It could happen, of course, but I think it's incredibly unlikely. Another very serious repercussion could be that if this is proven against City, there'll surely be an investigation by HMRC into whether City have been paying the correct amount of tax. Other clubs may even try to sue City for missed lucrative opportunities in European competition. And that's where the criminal law aspect could appear in this matter. It's not impossible, just very unlikely, I think. What I do think the most likely scenario is, in the short term, is that this case won't have an immediate impact. I don't foresee a huge exodus of players. It's going to drag on for months and probably years. After all, it's in City's interest to assert the allegations need to be proved to a very high standard, which will extend the proceedings even further. From a signing of players' perspective, City don't foresee any issues. They were able to attract and sign players and renew contracts when they were under UEFA investigation in 2020, and made it a point to convince the new signings that City had done nothing wrong and would be cleared. So the same messages are going to be delivered this time around as well. So much has also been made of, will Guardiola leave? Will the players? That's a huge irrelevancy for me. Unless Guardiola signs a further extension, his contract will have expired by the time this matter's resolved. A lot of this is guesswork since this is so unprecedented, but based on the CAS case, which City won, and based on the fact this case is going to be even harder to prove against City, given the level of the allegations, the degree of evidence consequently required, my prediction is that whether actually guilty or not, the panel will arrive at the conclusion that the Premier League failed to prove their case to a sufficient standard. If City is found to be guilty, it would be a terrible indictment on the club and its directors, and whilst I've made predictions on punishments, no one really knows what the final punishment could look like. Some final points to note are that the Premier League want this matter to be conducted in total privacy. I've seriously no idea how they expect to keep everyone in the dark for however long the case goes on, and while City can't appeal any decision to CAS, they can appeal the decision to another committee. But in the English legal system, such appeals are about matters of law than fact, so an appeal would be largely redundant. So, that's what's happening at Man City. A three-man panel now has to work out whether the Premier League is correct in accusing City of cooking its books for 9 years. They have to be convinced that the audits were inaccurate, the accounts false, and the directors responsible for those accounts dishonest for almost a decade. The independent commission will hear the case, the panel will hear the evidence from both sides, a decision will be reached, and English football will never be the same again, regardless of who wins. That's the video. Please let me know if you have any questions or thoughts by leaving a comment. I'm predicting City to win on the key issues of the case, but let me know what your predictions are. If you want to go the extra mile like these lovely people who allow me to keep making content like this for you all, shout out in particular to Kante, Frozone, Miz, Curtis, and all my patrons, you can support me directly on Patreon. The link's in the video description.